All right, guys, got some big breaking news. But first things first, yes, there is a sign behind me that says geese. The kids wanted to have a geese wedding yesterday. We have these little stuffed animal geese. And so we had a geese wedding, and we put up a banner that says geese. So anyway, that explains why it says geese behind me. But to the more pressing matters, Ron Desantis has just officially dropped out of the race. So there were a couple stories that came out. I think the main one was from Bloomberg, where they said this is basically inevitable. And it's interesting because Charlie Gasparino of Fox Business came out just 2 hours ago and said, actually, no, it's confirmed that he's going to stay in through South Carolina. And so obviously whoever is Charlie Gasparino's source was not as high up in the DeSantis campaign as whoever leaked to Bloomberg. But look, I got a kitty now too. Hey, buddy. Hey, buddy. But what ended up happening is about 20 minutes after that story leaked in Bloomberg, boom, he releases a video where he basically says, like, that's it, I'm throwing in the towel. But here's the more interesting part and the more important part. He actually endorsed Donald Trump, which, I don't know, I find that a little bit surprising. So I got Crystal here, who will gloat in a minute about how right she was, and she was right, let's be honest. But was that part surprising to you?
No.
It really wasn't?
No, I mean, that's the only path for him to continue in Republican politics is to suck up to Donald Trump. That's the only path forward.
Now, he acted like it was an ideological decision. Do you think it's ideological, or do you think it's like a power-humping decision?
Obviously, he's completely finger in the wind.
This
is where the winds are blowing.
Right. So he made it seem like, oh, Nikki Haley's a corporatist warmonger type thing. Yeah, it's like, it's got nothing to do with that.
He was a corporatist warmonger.
Until 7 minutes ago.
Congress. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. He wants to start a war with Mexico, but somehow that doesn't count in his book as a corporatist warmonger. So anyway, DeSantis drops out. I mean, look, I have to own up to something. After the midterms, there were a bunch of polls that came out, showed him with a massive surge. In some polls, he was tied with Trump. There were even some polls where he was beating Trump, and I definitely fell for the hype. And the reason why I fell for the hype and thought he would probably be the nominee is because I overestimated the Republican-based voters. I thought that to one extent or another, even if they cared a little bit about electability, that he would be the one they go to. Because he's basically like Trump 2.0 or Trump light. You remove all the stupid stuff about Trump, like the mean tweets and the pettiness and the drama, and you have a guy who's the same on policy, and he still plays the old hits like berating the media and calling them fake news and all that stuff. And I thought they're going to look at this guy and think, yeah, he's the updated version of Trump. And the polls showed that for a little bit. But more importantly, in the midterms, all the Trump-tied candidates, the ones who were most aligned with Trump, they all got waxed. Every last one of them, whether it's Doug Mastriano or Carrie Lake or Blake Masters, I mean, there's a whole list of them. You guys know this. So the more Trumpy the candidate was, the worse they did in the midterms. And DeSantis was one bright spot for Republicans in the midterms where he crushed in Florida, where in other states, Republicans underperformed across the board. So my thought was he's the better updated version of Trump. The polls are showing a surge. They're going to care at least a little bit about electability, and that means he's the one to beat. But that was honestly 100% incorrect, because what happened is as soon as Trump started hitting him and making fun of him, what happened? He just crumbled. He crumbled in front of everybody, and every single shot that Trump threw landed. Any sort of meek, half-hearted attempt to respond from DeSantis did not work. So that was the result, and I was wrong about that. And here's a final point I make. Unless you want to gloat real quick, you want to say anything about how right you were, because everybody knows you were right.
Good. Everybody
okay, knows. All right. So here's also why I think this is a little bit stupid, though, because it looks like, you know, if Nikki Haley doesn't win New Hampshire, or South Carolina, then like this thing is already over. And I really don't think Republicans are thinking at all about the fact that there is a really decent chance Trump does not make it to the general election, because he's got multiple cases which are trying to take him off the ballot. Some of them are succeeding, or at least, you know, in certain states it's been upheld and now it's got to go all the way to the Supreme Court. But even if you put that aside, there are 91 criminal charges against him. Even if he's guilty on some of them, it's a wrap. It's a wrap. And so it looks like there's no fallback plan. So what would happen in this scenario is like Trump's going to win the primary, which is overwhelmingly likely. Then it gets to a general. Then whoever he picks as his VP would then become the standard bearer if Trump is taken off the field. And then it's like, what are we going to have? A Republican Party based around Kristi Noem or Donald Trump Jr., which I think is actually very likely now that he would pick his son as like his replacement. So what do you see with that theory? What do you think of that?
I could see it. I don't rule it out.
Yeah, you don't rule out that he picked Don Jr. and then Don Jr. would be the... Because, look...
You can definitely trust him, to get daddy out of jail.
I'm at the point where it's like flip a coin if he's going to make it to the general election, right? Like, I think it's kind by saying 50-50.
It's, to me, more
kind
a matter
to him,
of
I mean.
timing.
It's more a matter of timing, yeah. So you're saying it's possible we get to the general election, we have the vote, he could win, and then after that is when, like, you get a guilty verdict. You want to talk about a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, well, I mean, he just pardoned himself. And then the state election charges, that's trickier, but I don't know.
See, this is what I'm saying. Like, if it unfolds on the timeline you're talking about, that's an even bigger constitutional crisis than if it unfolds in the way I'm talking about, right? Where, like, you do get an answer before the general election.
We really should have an answer. Like, ideally, they need to move it along.
I know. I mean, I thought they should have moved. This was your point all along. They should have moved along the cases even before the primary voting. Because in that scenario, if he already had a guilty verdict on something and his ass was already headed to jail, then it would be Nikki Haley versus Ron DeSantis. One of those two would be winning.
True.
And then Biden would definitely be losing.
True.
Trump is the only one where when it's Biden versus Trump, I don't know what's going to happen because they're both universally loathed. So, I don't know. Wild stuff, man. The end of putting Meatball Ron DeSantis, as we call him.